I'm the storyteller, and my stories must be told. I have many stories, tales for both the young and old. I have many voices to describe many places. Many names have I, and many faces. In Russia I am Ivan, in Sweden I am Jan. In Germany I'm Johann, in America I'm John. From my many travels I have gathered these tales to teach you good sense when all else fails. Sometimes there are tears, sometimes there is laughter, but always are happily ever after.
Long ago and far away in a market town, there lived two brothers. The eldest brother, Milo, was a rich farmer. He lived with his wife in a fine house in the outskirts of the town. His younger brother, Lapo, was poor and lived with his wife and daughter Manka in a humble cottage. Now Manka was a bright girl, and Lapo loved her dearly. One day, soon after Manka's 16th birthday, Milo came to visit his brother. He and his wife were childless, and they wanted Manka to come and work on their farm, tending the geese. Lapo was surprised to see his brother. "Greeting," he said. "What brings you here?" When Milo told him he wanted Manka to come and work, Lapo was very upset. "Come now," said Milo. "She can help support the family." Though Manka was sad to go, she knew her uncle was right. So she said goodbye to her parents and set off with her uncle for his farm. Lapo and his wife were very sad to see Manka go, for she was a great comfort to them. So Manka went to work on her uncle's farm, and for a long time she faithfully tended his geese. Though she missed her family dreadfully, she never said anything and worked hard for her uncle and aunt. Then one day, as Manka was working, her uncle appeared in the yard with a calf. "Look, Manka," he cried, "if you come and work as a maid in my house, instead of your wages, I will give you this fine calf. I will rear it for you. It will be very valuable one day." Manka could see that the calf would indeed make a fine cow. How delighted her mother and father would be, so she agreed. And Milo was very pleased. Time passed, and Manka worked hard keeping her uncle's house spick and span, and she never cost him 1 penny in wages. Then one day, word came that Manka's father was sick. Poor Manka was dreadfully upset when she heard the news. She so wanted to go home and help her mother nurse him. So when her uncle came to say why wasn't she working, she cried, "I want to go home and look after my father. Please, may I take the cow with me?" Milo was furious. "Go if you want," he shouted, "but you can't take the cow. I never promised it to you, and it's much too valuable now." Instead, her uncle offered her a few coins in payment for all her hard work. "You did promise me the cow," cried Manka. Throwing down the coins her uncle had given her, she stormed out of his house forever. Poor Manka returned home in great distress. How could her uncle have been so unjust to her? Hadn't she worked hard for him all that time? She'd so wanted to surprise her parents with the cow. When she arrived at the house, she went straight to her father's bedside. They could see that their daughter was upset. Manka told them how her uncle had cheated her out of the cow. Her father was so angry when he heard this that he tried to get out of bed, but was much too weak. When Lapo had recovered his strength, he marched straight through the town to the judge's house. This was a clear case of injustice. The cow belonged to Manka, of that there was no doubt. The judge listened gravely to Lapo as he told him how Manka had worked for her uncle without payment in return for the calf. The judge then beckoned Milo forward. Now Milo was sure that he would not lose the cow, because he was rich. He thought the judge would agree with him. The judge was perplexed. What should he do? He knew the poor peasant was right, but he didn't want to offend the rich farmer. Then he had an idea. Yes, that would settle the matter. "Listen to me," said the judge, "and listen well. Whoever answers me these 3 riddles correctly shall have the cow. First, what is the sharpest? Second, what is the sweetest? And third, what is the richest thing in the world? Whoever brings me the right answers by the stroke of 9 tomorrow morning, the cow shall be his. Until then, be sure and keep the peace." Both brothers were very puzzled, for they had no idea what was the sharpest, sweetest, or richest thing in the world. They'd have to think of something by tomorrow morning. They left the judge's house very perplexed. By the time Milo returned home, he was in a fine temper. How dare the judge give him some stupid riddles to answer? "What ails you, husband?" asked his wife. "That stupid judge," growled Milo, "won't give me back my cow until I've solved 3 riddles. What is the sharpest? What is the sweetest? What is the richest thing in the world?" His wife smiled. She knew the answers. First, she went to the fireplace where the dog was sleeping. "Nothing could be sharper than our dog, who hears everything," she laughed. She thought for a moment. "And what could be sweeter than our honey that has lain in the casket these 4 years? And what could be richer than our money box?" Milo was delighted. His wife had found the right answers. Now he could stop worrying and enjoy his food. His wife was very pleased to see his good humour returned. She watched with satisfaction as he drank down his soup with great gusto. Manka and her mother waited anxiously for Lapo to return. But when he came in, he looked very downhearted. "The judge won't give me the cow unless I answer 3 riddles correctly," said Lapo sadly, and he told Manka the riddles, but Manka smiled. She would find the answers for her father. She hugged him and told him not to worry. The next morning, over breakfast, Manka said, "I have the answers, father. The sharpest thing is the eye, for it sees through everything. The sweetest thing is sleep, for it makes us forget our worries. And the richest thing is the earth, for it is from there that all wealth comes." Lapo was delighted. What clever answers! Out he hurried. Manka stopped him at the door. "Please don't tell the judge how you came by the answers, father." Lapo promised not to tell, and away he went. Milo was the first to arrive at the judge's house. The servant showed him in. "Good day, Judge," said Milo. "I have the answers for you. Nothing in the world is sharper than my dog. Nothing is sweeter than my honey. And what could be richer than my money box?" The judge listened, but said nothing. Then Lapo was shown in. "I'm ready for your answers," said the judge. Lapo remembered what Manka had told him and began very shyly. "Sir, I believe the eye to be the sharpest thing, sleep the sweetest thing, and the earth the richest thing." There was a silence as the judge thought. First he looked at the rich farmer, and then he turned back to the poor peasant. And pointing to Lapo, he said, "Lapo, your answers are better. The cow is yours." Lapo was delighted, but Milo was furious and stormed out in a terrible rage. The judge asked Lapo to wait behind a moment. "Who gave you those answers, Lapo?" asked the judge. Lapo hung his head, for he did not wish to break his promise to Manka. But the judge grew angry, and Lapo feared that he might find him or take the cow. So he said, "It was my daughter, sir. The judge smiled. Then you have a very clever daughter. Now I have a riddle for her to solve. Tell her to come to my house, neither dressed nor undressed, neither by night nor by day, and neither on foot nor by carriage. Lapo listened very carefully. He didn't understand the riddle at all, but perhaps Manka would know. Manka was delighted when she saw her father return home with a cow. How wonderful! Now they could have their own fresh milk to drink, and some to sell. Manka and her mother were overjoyed, and so was Lapo to see his family so pleased, for it was a very fine cow. But Lapo was also upset that he'd broken his promise to Manka and told the judge. How was he going to tell her? But Manka soon noticed that something was worrying her father. "What is it, father?" she asked. "I'm sorry, Manka," said Lapo, "but I had to tell the judge that it was you who gave me the answers. Now he has a riddle for you." He told Manka the judge's riddle. Manka smiled when she heard the riddle, for although it was clever, she knew exactly what to do. When the clock struck 3 and night was turning into day, Manka rose from her bed. She was dressed only in a shapeless piece of sacking. Remembering the judge's words, on one foot she put a stocking but no shoe, and on the other foot she put a shoe with no stocking. Then she rode over to the judge's house in a goat. She did look a strange sight. The judge was on the lookout for her, and when he saw that she was coming neither by night nor by day, she was neither dressed nor undressed, and that she was neither in a carriage nor on foot, he marvelled at her cleverness. The judge congratulated Manka on solving the riddle so wittily. He found Manka so delightful and amusing that they spent the next few days together. Finally, one evening, he asked Manka to become his wife, and she joyfully agreed. A few days before the wedding, the judge asked Manka to come to his house, for he had something of great importance he wanted to say. When she was comfortable, the judge turned to her and said, "I will ask of you but one thing, my dear. Promise me that you will never meddle in my affairs, for if you do, I shall send you straight back to your father's house." Manka happily agreed. The wedding was a gay and festive affair. All the town came to toast the happy couple. Manka looked lovely, and the judge was obviously delighted with his clever and pretty bride. The wedding went on late into the afternoon, and it was generally agreed that it was the best wedding the town had ever had. The judge and Manka settled down to married life very happily. Manka was polite and kind to everyone, and she soon became a figure of importance in the town. Then one day, 2 peasants came to the judge's house. They were leading a foal which was valuable, and both of them claimed ownership of it. One of the peasants was rich and prosperous, while the other was very poor. When the poor peasant came before the judge, he explained how he owned the mare who had borne the foal, so the foal belonged to him. But the rich man said that was nonsense, for he owned the stallion that had sired the foal, so it belonged to him. The judge thought for a while. He knew that the peasant who owned the stallion was rich and important, and he had no wish to offend him. The 2 peasants were waiting for the judge's ruling, but instead the judge came over to the rich peasant and, taking him to one side, said he wanted a private word with him. After talking with the rich peasant, the judge was swayed by his argument, and he advised the rich man that the foal was his. It so happened that Manka was in the next room and overheard the judge's conversation. She was very shocked, for she knew her husband's decision was unjust. The rich peasant left very satisfied. Taking the foal, he marched back to his farm, leaving the poor peasant very unhappy. He was just leaving when Manka came running up to him. "The judge cheated you," she said. "The foal belongs to he who owns the mare." The poor peasant knew she was right, but what could he do? "I'll tell you what to do," said Manka, and whispered to him her plan. But she made him promise not to tell anyone it was her idea. The next morning, the poor peasant did exactly what Manka had told him to do. He climbed up the hill outside the town, and when he came close to the top, he threw down the fishing nets he was carrying. It just so happened that the judge and his friends were out hunting that morning and had to pass the hill on the way to the forest. As they were walking up through the undergrowth, they caught sight of someone through the bushes. Surprised to see anyone up there so early in the morning, they stopped to see what he was doing. And the judge was very surprised when he saw the poor peasant casting nets over the grassy slope. What was he doing with fishing nets up here on the hill? Was he setting a trap? Had he gone mad? Certainly something very strange was going on. They were so curious they had to ask the poor peasant what he was doing. "I'm fishing," replied the peasant calmly. The judge laughed. "Are you crazy? Who ever heard of fish swimming to the top of a hill?" Poor peasant replied, "If a stallion can have a foal, then fish can swim to the top of this hill." When the judge heard these words, he turned very pale. He quickly came forward and took the poor peasant aside so they might talk without being overheard by his friends. "I agree the foal belongs to you," hissed the judge. "But who told you to answer me in such a manner?" Poor peasant did not wish to break his promise, so he said nothing. But the judge became so threatening that the peasant began to fear for his life. He could see that the judge was determined, so at last he said reluctantly, Your wife told me what to say." The judge was furious and stormed off down the road. He marched back through the town in a great rage. How dare his wife interfere in his affairs? When he arrived home, he marched straight past Manka and into his study. Manka guessed immediately that the poor peasant must have told him. The judge stayed in his study all day brooding. At last, as evening fell, Manka ventured in to collect some glasses. She could see how angry her husband was, so she stayed silent. At last, he stood up, and looking at her very coldly, he said, "You promised never to meddle in my affairs." "I hate injustice," replied Manka quietly. "The foal belonged to him, and you knew it." The judge's temper rose. "That's none of your business. You will return to your father's house tonight, and so that you don't think me unjust, you may take with you what you value most." Manka could see that her husband was determined, so she said quietly, "Since you cannot forgive me, I will do as you say. But before we part, let us have one last meal together. Let us be happy, just for tonight." Because the judge still loved Manka, he agreed, and Manka went off to prepare the food, leaving the judge in a pensive mood. Manka prepared the most delicious dinner, with all the judge's favourite dishes and the very best wine from his cellar. "Husband, my dear, please drink to my health," said Manka. So they raised their glasses in a toast and drank. The judge drank his wine down quickly, while Manka only sipped at hers. There were many dishes of delicacies, and the judge ate and drank with great gusto. The judge drank a good deal of wine, and after an hour or so, he began to feel rather sleepy. The servant continued to fill their glasses, and the judge was enjoying the meal so much he drank even more. Suddenly, he began to feel very tired indeed. Try as he might, he could no longer keep his eyes open. No, he mustn't fall asleep. But as Manka watched with quiet satisfaction, she saw her husband's head nod and finally droop. Manka, not wasting a moment, went to her husband, and with the aid of the manservant, they lifted him from the table over to the bed. When Manka was sure he was sound asleep, she covered him up. The two servants lifted up the bed and carried the snoring judge out of the room. For Manka had instructed them to take the judge to her father's house. It was a strange sight indeed to see Manka, followed by the sleeping judge, making their way through the silent and deserted town. Manka's parents were most surprised to see their son-in-law arrive at their house in such a state. But when Manka told them what had happened and what her plan was, they happily made her and her sleeping husband welcome. It was late morning before the judge finally awoke. Feeling rather befuddled, he looked about him. But for the life of him, he didn't know where he was. Then he saw Manka. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "You told me to come here," she said quietly. "This is my father's house." "Then what am I doing here?" asked the judge, confused. "You told me to take the thing I valued most," smiled Manka. "So I took you." The judge had to laugh. Manka was really much too clever. Holding out his arms to her, he forgave her, saying, "From now on, you shall be judge." So the judge and Manka were reunited, much to everyone's delight. He kept his word to Manka and made her judge of the town. All the townspeople agreed to this, for they knew how wise and clever Manka was. The judge was truly delighted that he didn't have to sit around all day sorting out everyone else's problems anymore. Now he was free at last to spend his days out hunting with his friends, while Manka settled all the arguments in the district in her own clever way. Soon, Manka became famous throughout the land for her wisdom and wit, and many people came from near and far to hear her clever judgments.